What does Oregon have? What should we expect in Louisiana Monroe transfer Jerome Simmons? To talk about that, Brian Smith, longtime recruiting analyst, host of the Portal podcast here at the Locked On Network, is here to discuss. So I wanted to bring him up with you on the show today, Brian, because he comes over from Louisiana Monroe, 6'4", 333 pounds. In the 2024 cycle, he was the number 20 JUCO prospect. And Oregon's brought over its fair share of JUCO guys since Dan Lanning took over. None of them have really popped when coming from the JUCO or Division II ranks. You know, Jay Harris was a D2 guy. Sione Laulea was a JUCO. He's probably the most impactful. George Silva, an offensive lineman. So they haven't hit a home run, unless you count maybe Malik Benson, of course, who was JUCO, then Bama, then Florida State, and then was great with the Ducks this past year. But I wonder, because he was brought in to be one of the depth pieces on the defensive line, and he was once seen as good enough after having an all-conference season at Highland Community College to go play for South Carolina. But then he goes to UL Monroe this past year, played in 8 games, under 200 snaps, not a very good PFF grade, around 59. He's 6'4". He's well over 300 pounds. What's usually missing with a guy like this?
I'm guessing there's something with the motor, like he wasn't happy where he was, because you watch his film from JUCO and you see a guy that laterally could make people miss, and he's massive. I don't know if he was 3+ at JUCO. I don't know exactly where he was, but I don't think he was quite that big. But he could change direction. He could stop going one way and do a 180, like on a screen, and retrace his steps. So you got me. There's probably something where he wasn't happy where he was. That's my strong guess. And he played up and down, didn't play to the level of competition even at times, which is a problem. But when he wants to, and he wants to be motivated, he's a bear to handle. He can play 1-tech, he can play 3-tech, he can play 2-eye, he can play straight up. And, of course, Oregon uses different fronts, so he fits their scheme in a multitude of ways. Now they just got to get the most out of it. But if I tell anybody this another 100 times this year, it would be a low number. Coaches always think they can fix things. I highly doubt Dan Lanning is any different. I'm the guy that's going to make the difference. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But this is a guy ended up at Monroe for a reason. Something went wrong somewhere along the line. Now they're trying to fix it. Like last year when you guys took Malik Benson, I was like, yeah, good luck. It worked out. Sometimes you just don't know. And you take raw talent at spots where, let's just be honest, numbers matter. If he was a wide receiver that had multiple years of iffy, it's not as likely. But D tackles, as we talked about a million times on your show, there just aren't enough of them. You get more rope when you're an interior defensive lineman. There just aren't very many. There are 10 wide receivers conservatively for every good D tackle. Conservatively. It's ridiculous. So that's probably part of it. And again, God only made so many guys that weigh over 300 pounds and can move like Mr. Simmons. But when he wants to go, he could be that guy. So maybe getting him in a room that's got like the starting unit for Oregon's top 3 in the nation, I would imagine, D-line this next year. I would assume. I think that's a pretty good guess. If he can just rotate in and give them 12 to 15 snaps a game this year, that's a thumbs up, in my opinion, if you're Dan Lanning. Do you think that's unfair, or where would you rank that?
No, I don't, because the guys that Oregon lost, they weren't starters, but they were notable contributors. I'm talking guys like Tione Gray, who's at Notre Dame, Terrence Green, Alabama, or Jericho Johnson goes down to Cal with Tosh Lupoy, just to name a few. You know, Ashton Porter, we mentioned him yesterday on the show, going to Houston. Different position. Porter plays a different position than Simmons, who plays on the interior. But I think he's going to battle for playing time this fall with DeAndre Robinson, the North Carolina transfer, who, look, at this point in the college football calendar, with spring practice starting later this week, is certainly the defensive line transfer that I am most excited about. It's going to be in a reserve capacity unless one of the guys gets hurt, but Robinson and Simmons have the body type to back up an Amari Washington or a Bear Alexander going into this year. It just kind of depends, but we don't really know and we'll see how much information comes out during the spring, because Dan Lanning is usually pretty tight with that sort of stuff. Media access is very limited, which I totally understand. We just don't know who those guys are going to be, but the snaps are there. You're not going back to 2024 where Oregon played Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, and Amari Washington, and that was basically it. That's not how Lanning has wanted to operate his defensive line. He likes to rotate guys in, keep them fresh, reduce the risk of injury, and he's had very good results with that. But, you know, for what Oregon needs from him, I'm not going to sit here and say he's a vital player to Oregon's defense, but there's a role to be had. And you're one injury away from you're one injury away from Jerome Simmons competes for playing time. And, you know, when you mention Malik Benson, that certainly will click with a lot of Oregon fans. Because, I mean, 2 years at the Power 4 level, he hadn't done anything, right? But then he comes to Oregon, and, well, suddenly he was Oregon's leading receiver because he stepped up because of injuries, by the way, after flashing early on. So talk about Simmons a little bit more. What do you think his best season would look like? What is the best possible outcome for him if he plays, let's say, 300 snaps this year?
I think it's plausible because physically he's gifted enough to do it. He takes a lot of risks. He's a guy that wants to get up the field, and I'm curious to see what Lanning and his crew do this year without Tosh. They lost a lot of massive body. You mentioned like Gray and Porter and some of those guys. A bunch of guys over 250 and a few of them over 300. So I'm wondering if they're going to play a little more four-man line this year, and if they do, it would probably benefit Jerome because he likes to be a one gap, cross a guy's face even at 300-plus pounds, which is hard, but it shows his athleticism. Fake a guy, go cross his face, and get up the field. But he does swim moves and a lot of high-risk stuff. His rib cage is going to get crushed in the Big Ten if he continues to do that stuff. They're going to have to change a little bit of technique. That's like at the JUCO level and stuff. He kicked the crap out of most guys.
Right.
Yeah, USC, Ohio State, probably not the greatest idea. But when he wanted just to power somebody, he looks like the kind of guy that picks up cars. So I would imagine they're going to use him in a multitude of ways. Nose guard on the goal line, absolutely. He could be effective. If he has to start 3 or 4 games, should you be worried? I don't think so. Dan's not going to put somebody in there that's not capable. He's got enough young guys, he'll just say, screw it, play a freshman or sophomore if he has to. That's why he recruits the way he does. So I think he could be a 250 to 300 snap guy if somebody got hurt. But I'm guessing it's probably 175 to 200 in the regular season is more likely, and he's your 1B, not necessarily 1A, but like in 1 or 2 games you might have to start, play 25 snaps, and he's okay. The possibility of him making some impact, especially on passing downs, is pretty good because he'll get after it in the screen game, he'll chase guys down, and he's a pretty effective one-gap guy. I'm curious on the 2 gaps with the Big Ten level. That is animal strength, and that's part of it. I know this is not going to be fun. I am a blocking sled basically here. A lot of guys do not handle that well. That's the one question I have, and we'll just have to wait and see how that goes.
You mentioned the defensive line to wide receiver ratio. I don't think there's a better embodiment of that than for Oregon. You know, Eric Skopel mentioned earlier on the show that he was struggling to put together the wide receiver depth chart for Oregon this year because you've got Evan Stewart, you brought in Iverson Hooks from UAB, you have DeCorian Moore and Jeremiah McClellan back, and then you have Gatlin Bear, 5-star wide receiver who's coming back from his mission this year, and then you have Jalen Lott, 5-star, and maybe Dylan Gresham is ready to go. He was the star of the spring game. He got hurt last year and wasn't able to play because of a neck injury. Where does he fit into the fold? Then you have Messiah Hampton, who is Ross Douglas's guy, as a high school recruit coming over after. Yeah, he could be really good after being considered by Syracuse. So, and then you go to the defensive line, you go, okay, first 4 guys, they're all NFL dudes, really good. You could sell me on just about any combination of Oregon's defensive line rotation after the first 4, other than I know that Nasir Wyatt will be the most snapped guy to go after the quarterback. That much I'm confident in. But does Elijah Rushing play more than Tank Jones? I have no idea. It's going to be fun to follow and figure out as the year progresses. But does DeAndre Robinson play more than Jerome Simmons, or have they found a Kurt Signetti-esque G5 type of transfer that they just work in just the right way and figure out what his role is. I don't know. But I'm definitely excited to find out when spring ball gets started later this week for whatever we will find out, of course. Brian Smith, the Portal Podcast, longtime recruiting analyst. Great as always. Other news on the recruiting front. Big news and what Dan Lanning has to get better at.